Today is March 1st, 2026. This is the second day of the U.S. launched war of aggression against Iran, or perhaps relaunched war of aggression, because of course the U.S. launched a war of aggression against Iran last year as well. And this is almost certainly a continuation. The Trump administration, as all U.S. presidential administrations do, has lied to the American public. They have told them, we will not launch any new endless wars. And people said, that's great, we don't want any more wars. But what they actually meant by no more endless wars is that they're going to instead fight these short bursts of extreme violence, put it on pause, readjust, replenish their stockpiles, and then launch another war and do this again and again and again until they wear down targeted nations and collapse them. So it by no means meant the end of wars of aggression all around the globe. They're just using a different approach to wage them. Now, the U.S. is targeting military and political leadership in an attempt to decapitate it. And there are reports, and I'm looking at them right now. This is AP live updates. They're talking about the supreme leader having been killed in Iran. And I'm going to explain why, despite whether this claim is true or not, despite the supreme leader of Iran being killed, Iran continues to launch a coordinated and highly effective retaliation campaign primarily through their ballistic missile and long-range drone capabilities. I will explain why that is in just a moment. The United States is attempting to strike through airstrikes and missile strikes, attempting to decapitate the military and political leadership. They're also trying to strike at Iranian military capabilities in the hopes of crippling them, creating instability that forces on the ground can then exploit to topple the government entirely. And this is something the U.S. has done in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq. People, when they think about Iraq, they only think about the 2003 invasion, but it actually started with Operation Desert Storm in the 1990s. There was a period of years where the U.S. continuously bombed Iraq, targeted Iraqi military capabilities, continuously prevented them from rebuilding them. They had militants and terrorists on the ground causing violence and trying to degrade and destabilize the government until the 2003 invasion began. And then, and only then, did they finally topple the Iraqi government. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind that that is what the U.S. is attempting to do now. The map that I'm about to show you, you're going to see also in AP and other live updates, you're going to see a long list of countries Iran is shooting ballistic missiles at. But they're not shooting these missiles randomly into all of these countries across the region. They are targeting, and very precisely, they are targeting U.S. military facilities across the entire region. Look at this map. This is just some of them. This is an incomplete map. Bases in Iraq, bases in Syria, bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE. Of course, there are bases in Jordan, U.S. military bases in Jordan that Iran is striking. Of course, Iran is striking Israel, which is essentially a forward operating base for the U.S., or as some American politicians themselves have called it, if unsinkable aircraft carrier. The U.S. is basically docked with the rest of the region. So this is what Iran is doing in retaliation. And I will talk more about that here in just a moment. Many people may have heard U.S. President Donald Trump give his speech announcing the beginning of military operations against Iran, exactly as President George Bush Jr. did when he announced the invasion of Iraq in 2003, or the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, or President Barack Obama announcing U.S. military operations launched against Libya, and then also Syria, and on and on and on. This is exactly what I warned people was going to happen. President Donald Trump was going to pick up right where all of his predecessors left off. He serves continuity of agenda. Everyone in his administration are serving corporate financier interests on Wall Street, which Washington is simply a servant of. Regardless of the conservative or liberal spin and branding they attach to the messages, the lies that they are telling the American people, they all eagerly serve these corporate financier interests. Does not matter which party you vote for, what politician you pick, they serve Wall Street. They do not serve the American people. Their job is to sell Wall Street's agenda to the American public, or at least justify it, or at least keep it moving in a forward direction for as long as possible. And we remember President George Bush justifying the invasion of Iraq based on deliberately false claims of weapons of mass destruction being present in Iraq. And President Donald Trump's speech just yesterday echoed these exact same lies. Iran cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Iran is a threat to global stability. Was it Iran who just invaded and kidnapped a president in Latin America? Was it Iran launching drone strikes deep inside Russian territory to strike at Russian energy production? Was it Iran attacking oil tankers, shipping Russian energy abroad? No, is the United States doing all of this? Is it Iran building its military forces up in the Asia-Pacific region to confront and fight an equally unnecessary and extremely dangerous war with China? No, it is the United States. So again, anybody who's actually thinking objectively, who makes decisions based on principles, not political or personal affiliations, they will see straight through what President Donald Trump said in his speech. They will see that it is just continuity of agenda, and they will realize this is exactly what analysts like myself warned about was going to happen. If you follow the money, if you look at who these people really are, if you listen to what they're actually saying, and you tune out your own bias, you will hear that this is just a continuation of everything the US has been doing all throughout the 21st century. This is the continuation of what many people voted President Trump into office to stop. President Donald Trump accused Iran of killing Americans. But who were these Americans and where were they? He was complaining about a strike on US Marines in Lebanon. Lebanon is nowhere near the United States. It is closer to Iran than it is to American shores. What were American troops doing in Lebanon? He complained about Iran being involved in killing Americans in Iraq. That was an illegal invasion and occupation of Iraq. The Iraqis had the right to fight back. Iraq had the right to ask its allies for help fighting back. If you're an American and you don't want to see American troops be maimed or killed, which is a very rational and human thing to desire, make your politicians and the interests driving their policies stop sending them to foreign countries to invade. Every nation on earth has a right to fight back when invaded, when attacked. They have the right under international law to fight back. That is their right, and they are allowed to do it. And if you don't want to see Americans dying in the process, don't invade. Tell your politicians to bring those troops home. And when they do start dying, blame the politicians and the corporate financier interests driving their policies for their death. Don't blame the people who are invaded, whose nations are being destroyed out from under them, watching their friends and family die all around them. Don't blame them for fighting back. If it was the other way around, Americans would have the right to fight back. So why don't Iraqis, why don't Iranians have a right to fight back? Again, just basic common sense that many Americans have been conditioned to just ignore. And again, if you look at this map, you can see how the United States has infiltrated the entire region through invasion, occupation, political capture, coercion, and it has placed military bases all around Iran. And if you recall, US troops were also in Afghanistan. And even though they have withdrawn, there is still a very large presence of militants and terrorists the US continuously arms and backs to carry out cross-border strikes deep into Iran. Here, and of course, Armenia and Azerbaijan, the US has a growing presence there as well. And all of this is to encircle, encroach upon, threaten, and eventually collapse Iran. And Iran has the right to fight back. They have a right to fight back. During President Trump's speech, he also just outright lied. He tried to connect Iran to the Hamas October 7, 2023 attack on Israel. And I've already talked about that. I've already followed the money and ignored the ideology and personal proclivities to explain why Hamas did that, what it actually served. It didn't serve any interests of the people in Palestine, the Palestinian people. It actually only supercharged and accelerated US interests across the region and served as a catalyst to mobilize Israel to serve those interests. And if you remember at the time, initial US intelligence suggests Iran was surprised by the Hamas attack on Israel. So this is President Donald Trump doing exactly what President Bush, Obama, and Biden did before him, just outright lying to the American people, telling them whatever he thinks will convince them to go along with yet another war of aggression, a legal war of aggression. Now let's talk about the actual details of this conflict. As far as we can tell, again, the US is attacking Iran. They're attempting to overwhelm them on a psychological and political, social stability level. They want to push them off balance and hope that a collapse manifests itself in the process. And they need to do this very quickly. They need to do this before operational momentum slows down and a sort of tactical and strategic equilibrium is established. And I'm not comparing Russia's special military operation in Ukraine to the US war of aggression on Iran, because you have to remember, Ukraine was overthrown by the US, and the US installed a client regime in Ukraine. It was essentially an occupied country with a puppet regime put in place. And then the US began militarizing Ukraine right on Russia's border for the explicit purpose of threatening Russia's national security and provoking a war between the two countries. And Russia knew this war was coming. It was going to come whether they did anything or not. They decided to launch the special military operation so that they could fight this inevitable war on their terms, not Washington's. But what Russia did do was prepare for a long-term war of attrition. But Plan A was a very quick, decisive military operation, hoping to push Ukraine off balance, so much so that everything just collapsed and that long war of attrition would not be necessary. They were prepared for both Plan A and Plan B. Plan A failed. A tactical and strategic equilibrium was established, and now they're in the now very long-term war of attrition that is taking place. But they prepared for that, and that is their strength. Attrition is Russia's strength. For the United States, this initial decisive phase is where all of their strengths lie. A long-term war of attrition is, in fact, one of their largest weaknesses. So it's very important to understand that. For Iran, all they need to do is survive. That is all they need to do. They need to maintain stability internally. They need to continue carrying out retaliation strikes, forcing the United States to expend huge amounts of its interceptor munitions, Patriot, THAAD, and everything in between, all the naval interceptor variants that are being used, warplanes that are being tasked with shooting down drones and other Iranian munitions, slower munitions that are being launched. This is what Iran needs to do, and this is what Iran is doing. Iran has targeted, as far as the Western media has reported, U.S. military facilities in Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. And of course, they've been hitting Israel very hard. And there are videos of these strikes. These are not just random strikes. These are very precise strikes. There's video footage of a Shahed long-range drone diving into a U.S. military base and specifically striking a radar system. And this is what Iran's plan is to do: use huge amounts of very cheap, expendable drones to destroy very expensive, hard to replace U.S. American military hardware. Now, if you want to see this footage, and be warned that a lot of it can become very grisly as time goes on. There are Telegram accounts that I have posted in the video description below that post a lot of this footage, these images. Again, be warned, this is war, and you cannot unsee these things once you see them. Middle East Spectator, AMK Mapping, also Scott of Calibrated, who kind of condenses the content of both of these channels if you are unprepared for the huge volume of information that these two former accounts are putting out there. I would also suggest that you tune into the Duran, Alex and Alexander of the Duran. They do daily videos, and they will summarize everything that is happening. And so the links to all of them will be in the video description below. Now, it's very important to note, because the US claims, and I believe Iran has now confirmed, that Iran's supreme leader has actually been killed in this decapitation campaign. However, Iran continues carrying out a highly coordinated and effective retaliation. How is that possible? Here's why it really doesn't matter in and of itself that the senior leadership, political, religious, or military, is decapitated. As long as Iran can maintain internal cohesion on all of the lower levels, everything is going to be fine. And I'll explain exactly why, because Iran is a large and sophisticated nation, and it has continuity of leadership. Every single large, sophisticated country has continuity of leadership. If you kill one or two or even entire rooms full of senior leaders, there are people below them who understand the job and can do that job if necessary. And that is why if you kill all the senior leadership of Iran, they will continue fighting on. There's another reason they continue fighting on. First of all, Iran suffered a decapitation strike last year. Their allies, Hezbollah, suffered a very serious decapitation strike, series of decapitation strikes in Lebanon. And so they were expecting this, and they fine-tuned their continuity of leadership specifically for this. And as a matter of fact, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, just a few days before this all started, he was asked in a public media event, something like, are you worried about the Americans? Are you worried about dying? And he said, I want to be a martyr. And people don't understand this. Every country has a different culture and mindset. And in Iran, they're not fighting to kill other people and take and then enjoy what they have. They're fighting to defend what they have, and they are willing to die for it. And this is a very deep culture that Iran has developed over decades of being attacked by the United States and its proxies. For decades and decades, the Iran-Iraq war, a constant proxy war from Lebanon to Syria to Iraq to Yemen. This is what they have faced for decades. This is shaping their culture, and this concept of martyrdom, this willingness to die, gladly die to defend what they have, is deeply entrenched in Iran. So not only does continuity of leadership exist in Iran, but Iran has finely tuned this in recent years following multiple attempted decapitation strikes against Iran. And they expected all of this to happen, and so they have had plans put in place for it. Iran operates a military system called mosaic defense. What is a mosaic? If you have a big painting, it is one single picture. If you have a mosaic, it is a whole picture made up of tiny individual tiles. And so they have created a mosaic defense where they have dozens of regional military commands that can fight independent of central command. If communications with central command are cut, they will continue fighting. They know what the plan is, and they will continue fighting. They have targets that they have been assigned to continue to strike at. They have their own supply network, their own logistics, all of their own capabilities internally, and they can continue fighting. And then what the United States would need to do is attack and decapitate every single one of these dozens and dozens of regional military commands, in addition to decapitating central command. And this is precisely why Iran continues to fight effectively, despite the US claiming to have killed the supreme leader of Iran, its senior military leadership, because they put all of this in place ahead of time. They were expecting this. The real danger is if, in combination with these decapitation strikes, the US effectively degrades Iranian military capabilities. If they had not dispersed them and protected them properly, and the US is able to destroy not even most of them, but just a large enough number of them, and then if they have forces on the ground, special forces together with militants and terrorists, they can exploit this degradation of Iran's ability to defend itself from attack abroad and also from attack within. So the war is going to come down to two things for Iran: its ability to maintain internal cohesion and its ability to use its fighting capacity to attrit American offensive and defensive munitions. Magazine depth. This is something that I've been talking about since the conflict in Ukraine began. The US has a serious crisis in terms of military industrial production. So does Europe, so does Israel. They do not have the ability to produce the munitions necessary to fight all of the many and multiplying wars of aggression they feel they need to fight to establish and maintain primacy around the globe. If Iran is able to continue a steady barrage of ballistic missiles against all of these targets across the Middle East where U.S. facilities are located, again, and this is what it looks like, and Iran has hit almost all of these places and multiple times and effectively. And as they do, the U.S. is spending huge numbers of Patriot missile interceptors, THAAD interceptors. Israel has its own interceptors, joint produced with the United States. These cannot be replaced quickly. It is very unlikely the U.S. has even replaced the interceptors spent during the conflict last year. They probably replaced some of them. They probably moved around the existing stockpiles they have for availability here in this region, but they cannot replace them through manufacturing. This is a huge problem for the United States. This isn't going to just affect the U.S. ability to continue this conflict with Iran in the Middle East. It's also going to compromise the other wars and proxy wars the U.S. is fighting against Russia in Ukraine, and preparations for war the U.S. seeks to fight against, say, China. And so this is a very delicate balancing act the U.S. is performing. They need to do this quickly. The longer this drags on, if Iran is resilient, America will fail, not because the U.S. was defeated by Iran in a head-to-head military conflict in the Middle East, but simply because Iran held out and exhausted U.S. capabilities, depleted their magazine depth, the stockpiles of weapons that they have that they need not just to fight and maintain dominance in the Middle East, but their ability to fight and maintain primacy over the entire globe. This is imperial overreach. This is Empire 101. If you look all throughout history, this is what has happened to empires over and over and over again. So, depleted interceptors, and the U.S. Interceptor magazine depth is depleted. This will allow Iran to eventually deal greater and greater damage to U.S. assets all across the region. It will complicate U.S. military operations against Iran in the region, and it will also compromise U.S. Ambitions for primacy all around the globe. However, let's talk about economic damage in the region, because I hear a lot of people say, why doesn't Iran start flattening oil production in all of these Persian Gulf states? Why don't they do that? And the answer is because the oil isn't going to the United States. The U.S. wants to control the region and the oil within it, not to seize it for itself and its own use, but to prevent it from being sent to who? To China. And so Iran attacking oil production in the Middle East or stopping oil exports from the Middle East abroad, that is only going to hurt China, not the United States. And the U.S. would probably encourage that, or maybe even eventually impose conditions to restrict oil exports to China all on its own. So Iranian resilience and attrition of U.S. munitions will be key in this conflict. That is what you need to remember and keep an eye out for. Now, with President Donald Trump bragging about murdering yet another leader of a country, another nation, he's kidnapping presidents, he is killing leaders, he is destroying entire countries, just like President Bush, Obama, and Biden before him. This is another example of the U.S. telling the world what I have been warning people about for years. You cannot negotiate with the U.S. The U.S. wants global domination. You cannot negotiate with someone like this. There are no, if they want to control the entire planet, the only thing they're going to accept is you surrendering to them, your subordination to them, you giving everything that you have and have worked for to them. That's the only thing that is acceptable to them. Everything else they say during negotiations is simply a means of tricking you in, lulling you into a false sense of security so they can take these things by force if you don't give them willingly. This is another example of how the U.S. will not fix its problems internally. Elections are not going to solve this. Many people who vote, not all of them, but many people who voted for President Trump voted for him to specifically not do this. And then he did it. You're not going to fix the U.S. Its problems through elections. That is not going to happen. The only thing to stop the global menace the U.S. demonstratively represents is by forcing them to stop through isolation, cutting them off from resources that they are using to build up their military menace, and through deterrence, building up your military capabilities and working together in such a way that the US will not even dare attack because they know they cannot win. And if that doesn't work, the rest of this planet that is being targeted by US primacy, they need to have a willingness to fight back and stop the US if necessary. Back during World War II, when it was happening, especially in the beginning when it started, people were not calling it World War II. They didn't start calling it World War II until the war had spread all over the world and it was an open, outright war. That's when they started calling it World War II. But World War II actually started well before that. And World War III has already started. The question is it going to continue to expand to an all-out, outright war between the US, Russia, China, and everyone in between? The United States is already killing Russians directly. They're saying that it's being done through Ukraine, but they admit the CIA is the one carrying out these strikes deep inside Russia. They admit the CIA runs Ukrainian intelligence. So when Ukrainian intelligence is killing Russian generals in the streets of Moscow, that is the CIA doing that. The US is backing militants, killing Chinese engineers all along the Belt and Road Initiative infrastructure stretching across Eurasia. So the US is, in essence, killing Chinese engineers. And now they're openly waging all-out war against Iran. So this is World War III taking shape, and it can only stop if people wake up to the reality, the internal realities of the United States and how they affect the world collectively, the responsibility of multipolarism, coming together, working together to abandon the self-delusion that this isn't happening, it's not serious, it'll blow over. It's not going to. It's only going to stop if people make it stop, and if you don't stop it, it will be World War III. And we will all lose everything that we have worked for, just like people lost everything during the previous two world wars. So it's time for us to all wake up to reality, however unpleasant. We have to constantly follow the situation in Iran. If the US manages to topple Iran, that will be a serious blow to multipolarism. That will be one less pillar holding up multipolarism, and it will be one step closer to isolating and containing, degrading first Russia and then China itself. And then the world will be entirely at the mercy of the United States. And we can already see how the US does its business by lying to people about what it's doing and openly and boasting about just mass murdering people, killing leaders, blaming countries for fighting back against US invasion into their region. President Trump, during his speech, was complaining about US military personnel dying in Lebanon and Iraq and in Syria and the USS Cole in Yemen. And it's like, why are these US troops thousands of miles away from the US in this region in the first place? What if it was Iran doing that? One of the pretexts the US used to invade and topple the government in Venezuela was supposed claims that Iran had some sort of presence in Venezuela. Why does the US get to do that to Venezuela, but Iran can't even fight back when the US is literally surrounding them in the Middle East? So all things I hope people start thinking about. And I hope that people wake up to whatever mistakes they made before and after the 2024 election, the false hope that was created, that they bought into. I hope they can see through that now. And we can all move forward together, because this is critical. This is event. You might not care about Iran today because it has nothing to do with who you are or where you live. And you might not have cared about Venezuela yesterday, but eventually this is going to end up affecting you someplace you do care about, someplace you do live, and it will affect you in a way you will not be able to avoid. So let's get ahead of this before we end up drowning in it. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. It also helps boost the video on various platforms so other people see this information. Check the video description below for other places to find and follow my work. Under every single video, there's a little tiny video description, and then there's a little word that says more. If you click on more, it'll expand it. It'll show you all of the links that I referenced in the video, as well as for other places you can find and follow my work. I post all of my work on YouTube, Rumble, Telegram, and X. Also in the video description are ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize any of my social media platforms. If any ads at all pop up, feel free to skip them. I didn't put them there. I'm not benefiting from them in any shape, form, or way. So if you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also through Patreon. To everyone who has helped out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or if you have no resources to spare at all and you're simply just helping share, like, comment, send news tips, all of that is greatly appreciated. All of that is what makes this work possible. I thank you sincerely, and as always, thank you for watching.